Here's a question for you. When do you start to accept yourself and when do you start to change yourself? Like, you hear a lot of people yapping about, oh, it's okay, bro, accept yourself for who you are. It's okay if you're addicted to 20 different social medias and feed off of your friends' validation. And when the situation works against their favor, you see the same people saying, okay, now you need to change, bro. And it's like, how do you even know when to accept yourself and when to change yourself? Here's how I dealt with that dilemma. I used to think that accepting yourself is giving up and that I needed to change every time. But changing every time only traps you, because if you keep changing for everyone, then how can you be anyone? And that's when I realized that accepting yourself and changing yourself are not on opposite sides of the spectrum where you pick between changing or accepting. No. They both work together in order to make a significant change in your life. Because if you skip accepting yourself and look to changing immediately, then you're not gonna be successful because you're changing something that you're not willing to let go of yet. You can't get by without accepting yourself first, and it doesn't necessarily mean that if you accept yourself, that's the way it is forever and that you've given up. Accepting yourself is the first step towards changing. It's when you take the L and acknowledge that, okay, I failed this time, but I'm gonna change. That's acceptance. And saying, I'm gonna change, is the step that you take in order to change. Simple as that. I mean, it's confusing, but simple. Like, let's say two people get broken up with. The first guy goes to the gym immediately, like the normal gym rat does, to make himself better. But the second guy takes the L, like, say he says, oh, it was a good relationship, I'm very sad and it's unfortunate that it happened, takes the L, but ends up going to the gym afterwards as well to make himself better. See, both guys ended up taking the same step in order to make themselves better, but the difference is, who's gonna end up killing themselves a year from now? It's the guy who took the L that lives for longer because he has learned to let that go in order to change for the better. How can the first guy change if he keeps clinging onto that relationship that he had? If you fail the test and you think that you're not gonna pass another one, then how can you win if you keep clinging onto that possibility that you might lose? This is what accepting does. It made me realize that it's not a choice between the two, but you do both every time. This is what's gotten me on self-improvement. Like, how could I have changed back then when I didn't even know what was wrong with me? Like, back then, I refused to acknowledge that I was this skinny. Back then, I refused to acknowledge that I was hanging by a thread trying not to fail every subject. Back then, I refused to acknowledge that I didn't even know what I was doing with my life and I was directionless. Let me ask you this question. How could I have changed back then? Accepting yourself is realizing and acknowledging that there's something wrong or that you've made a mistake and forgiving yourself for that. But you have to acknowledge as well that something needs to change. It's not a bullshit, oh, if you don't accept me at my worst, then you don't deserve me at my best. No. What this does is that it lets people blame others for their own shortcomings. Oh, they don't like that I'm incredibly manipulative and toxic in relationships? Their problem. I'm not going to change. Changing starts with acceptance. It's not a choice between the two. And accepting yourself doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving up. No, it just means that you're acknowledging that you've made a mistake today and that you want to change for the better because of it. And so, to answer the question, when do you start to change and when do you start to accept yourself? The answer is every time. So, I want you to do me a favor. Live. Like, this is the third time I'm recording this. I sure do hope that the audio doesn't cut off. Like, first two recordings, audio cuts off. I can't edit. I have to re-record every day. But yeah, goodbye.